Come back. Let's just start. Welcome to the Shit Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
My name is David Coe.
And I'm Richard Basolato, down in the far left.
And my name is Joe Augustin, and as Andrea said, welcome to the show. It's the only show that's brave enough to ask, what if the apocalypse had a recurring Friday slot? This week, Earth continued its exciting rebrand from habitable planet to air fryer with Wi-Fi. Europe has been hit by a deadly heat wave. Deadly heat waves. The U.S. is sweltering. The oceans just had their hottest June ever. And in Britain, parents are booking air-conditioned hotels to keep babies safe, which is absolutely adorable until you realize the baby's first words might just well be housekeeping. And as millions of people need air conditioning to survive, AI data centers are still powering forward, producing helpful messages like, to stay cool, drink water. Data centers are straining grids. Google's electricity use is skyrocketing. And the cloud, that magical place where all photos, banking, hospital systems, and terrible first drafts lives, well, turns out to be less of a cloud and more thousands of very hot computers and sheds. And speaking of heat, a tech leader has a meltdown on live TV. Meta has allegedly managed to co-create a book tour where the author can't talk about the book. And everyone in Silicon Valley is calmly insisting that that is innovation. So tonight, as heat waves test our bodies, AIs test our grids, geopolitics test our nerves, and quantum computing quietly just sits in the corner there like the final boss level of a cybersecurity-based first-person shooter. We're asking the only sensible question. Who ensures the cloud when the cloud catches fire? Who protects companies, governments, hospitals, banks, and frankly, all of us, when the digital world becomes as unstable as the real one? To help us understand cyber risks, cyber insurance, and why the future may need both better passwords and better underwriting, we're delighted to welcome to the group today Group Head of Cyber Risks at Beazley, Alessandro Lezzi.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. A pleasure to be here.
Hello, Alessandro. Welcome to be here. I think that was a great sort of introduction. But would you like to share a bit more background about some of the things you're really passionate about? Can be beyond work. Could be Italy and the World Cup, for example.
Yeah. So I got two passions. One is definitely football, and unfortunately, Italy did not qualify for the World Cup. The last three editions, which is a little bit of a shame given the history of Italy in football. And I've got a 12-year-old daughter, and always makes this joke that unfortunately she never have seen Italy play in the World Cup, which is quite a shame. So they have to support other teams, including England, as we live in London. But I'm quite busy during my daily life to understand and trying to help company to understand and the cyber risk, the security posture they have, the cyber world, and they write the risk. So company can do two things. They can risk transfer to us some of the liability, but also we help company with a specific team to go through a cyber incident to minimize the impact on the company, on the reputation, but also to minimize the impact on the client, especially if the company is on the retail sector that's got clients as individuals. It is a very hot topic at the moment. There is an intersection between insurance, cybersecurity, technology evolution, including artificial intelligence, quantum computing, but then we also think about how the geopolitical change in the world impact the cyber threat for our clients. Cyber call it war or warfare is also one of the methodology that countries are using to put pressure or to actually incentivize some of the other countries to change their behavior, and we've seen this quite a lot, especially in the last 5 years.
So I think that's kind of a really good description along. And could you give some sort of more specific, everyday examples of what that means of, what you do and why we need it, as in, kind of how might I invisibly not be aware of what it is that you're doing and how I might need it.
Yeah, so I think cyber insurance is not any different from any other type of insurance, in the sense that historically insurance is a tool to help company to risk transfer, but at the same time it's also been used to incentivize or change behavior of company towards best standards. Give you an example. During many years ago, there was a fire in London, and some of London was destroyed by the fire. And this was the first time that there was a thinking around how we can minimize the impact on the community on this. And then there was some standard that were imposed to company to be able to minimize the impact of fire. And the insurance company has partnered with specific risk engineer to raise the bar for company to be able to face a new fire, new risk. At the same time, this is exactly what we do in cyber insurance. We assess company according to some standards, because being an insurance company, we have to risk select. We need to understand which risk is better than others according to some criteria. So in some case, when the company's got some security standards are below what we required, we either don't insure them or we partner with them to help them to get to a level that they become insurable. So the bar for the cybersecurity kind of raised, and this is definitely helped in the last 3 to 5 years, as we've seen company evolving towards more standards, reducing to some extent the risk, and improving, socially the overall position in terms of cybersecurity. At the same time, I have to say that cybersecurity is very, very dynamic, and the threat around, the bad actor and what's happening in the dark web is changing daily, which means that sometimes it's basically a race between, the attacker and the defender, and the company, they're always to some extent on the back foot because the technology moves so fast that, company needs to, change the security posture, update the security policy in a very fast way. And typical example nowadays is the release of this new artificial intelligence model where they can discover vulnerability in less than 2 seconds. So the company's got not enough time to deploy patches, and they need to find a different way to protect the state of the company itself. The things also that we provide for company, as I say, is not just about shifting the liability for their balance sheet to our balance sheet, but it's also we provide service to help the company to navigate the cyber incidents. We've seen many cyber incidents, maybe over 10,000 across different years, but most company and even today, they are still, unprepared to this type of events. It does require a lot of coordination across different departments. So we have a specific team, call it like a crisis management team, that steps in and help the company to coordinate the response, to coordinate the assessment of what's happening, to maybe notify a regulator, in some case, notify all the individuals that's been affected, and eventually also understanding the impact of on the business itself, on the loss of profit or revenue that they have, and especially in the medium to long term, and at the same time also trying to minimize overall the impact of the reputation on the company. And there were also some cases that after a cyber event, the C-suite has to resign, and because they didn't put some security tool in place to basically minimize the impact of the company. So the consequence can be economically, reputationally quite large for company. Our main idea and main focus is to minimize the impact on the company, minimize the impact on the client of the company itself. At the same time, in the medium to long term, to partner to the company to elevate the cyber posture to minimize what can eventually in terms of an economic impact for the company itself.
So what would that mean in a way of asking it the other way around? If you weren't around, what would our kind of life on the internet be like?
I mean, I guess just to be clear, also, there are a lot of companies still that don't buy this type of insurance, right? So the penetration of this insurance change according to the geography is higher in the US, is picking up in Europe, is on the low side in Asia. So there is still a lot of example where companies don't have insurance. And there are, this is very well known that Jaguar had quite a large cyber incident back in September last year, and Jaguar did not have any cyber policy, so they have basically to face this by themselves and to face the impact in the balance sheet. But at the same time, as we know, the UK state has to step in to rescue some of the small company that were working with Jaguar, that were unable to deliver the goods to Jaguar itself. So there is without insurance, as I say, it could be the impact on the economy will definitely be larger, because we tend to help companies to minimize the loss and the impact. But at the same time, I think the adaptation of the new security standard or the improvement on security to some extent will be slower without insurance. Hence, the possibility for bad actor to hack a company would be higher.
So it sounds like you very much kind of set that path. I like the way you describe about how you help the companies get healthy to be able to qualify for the insurance. I think that's kind of a way of thinking about that. And of course, we tend to hear on the news all about how the big hacking that goes around are kind of like from states and things like that. So is this something that's kind of very geopolitically motivated? Is that where a lot of threats come from? How does that lay out?
You're right. Did you hear David's question? All right, we got
some connectivity issue, I think.
He's holding very still.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
But let's give him a chance. Maybe he can give us a wave.
No, he's definitely. It's if he was a senior member of the U.S. Senate, I'd say something else was happening, but no.
But I was going to say to David or Richard, the Jaguar story. I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah.
It was elaborate.
It was very big here in the UK. They had basically had a penetration of their internal systems from a malicious source. I can't remember how it was introduced into Jaguar, but it basically locked down the whole company, and the company couldn't make any payments, couldn't function at all. And like most large industrials, they work with dozens, if not hundreds, of small suppliers, and none of them could get paid.
That was interesting.
Yeah, if you're a small company that's servicing someone like Jaguar Land Rover, that's probably accounts from anything from 30 to 100% of your turnover, and you're not getting paid. You're going to go under very quickly.
Just checking if Alessandro is back with us. Give us a wave if you can hear us.
Yeah, I'm back.
Yep. All right. Okay. All right. So I'll get David to ask that last question again.
Yes. So I was asking how much of this has to do with kind of geopolitics. You hear about different countries being hotbeds of kind of cyber hacking and stuff. So are you very much kind of like a border patrol as well?
Yeah, I think when you talk about cyber incidents, you can argue that there are two categories. They're going to be, and the difference is mainly about motivation. One is about is a very financial motivation, in the sense that the main target is to get money out of a cyber event. Typical example is Jaguar, and the bad actor managed to the estate of the company and encrypt the data and then ask for a ransom to be able to release a code, the data and the system. In this case, the bad actor is potentially motivated by the amount of money that they can get out. And then the ransom that we've seen can change it from few $1,000s to millions of dollars, right? There are examples of ransomware that's been paid excess of $50 million. So it's normally a proxy compared to the size and the revenue of the company. There are factors that are divided by things is a
Alessandro,
about getting some money out of the incident. The country itself.
We're just having a bit of an issue with your connection. So, have you got a strong connection where you are? You're just breaking up a little bit.
So I think I'm back.
Yeah. No, we'll just keep going. We'll keep trying. Yeah.
Yeah.
The 50 million ransom.
Yeah.
Is that the highest ransom you have heard about in this space?
Actor motivated by and I mean, and of course we don't see all the ransom, right? Because we only see the one that are on the client, and we see also what happened in the war. Some sources, I think the highest ransom can be excess of $70 million, which is a lot of money. And also, this company, which we advise them how to negotiate. We have specific negotiate them with better. So some company going in a panic mode. Instead of negotiating, they just want to get rid of the internet and want to pay straight away. So it also depends on the factor of how is your, let's say, plan B, your backups, your ability to recover, paying the ransom versus, I want this to keep this super confidential. I don't want this to go in the public. I just want to get paid and, get out of it. Bearing in mind that, the payment of the ransom is not a guarantee. Because once the data has been taken, I don't know where it stands, even if you make a promise.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. No,
it's just breaking up a bit. Is your connection okay? Are you hot? We had some issues last week with David because his computer.
Yeah,
my connection seems okay.
I think someone listening into this might vaguely feel that we should have paid some cybersecurity insurance for this as well.
We're being hacked with a denial service attack going on here.
Well, you never know, right? Well, maybe we could go into the war specifically with the war in Iran. See if we can.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I think we can continue back. Kind of connect back to Alessandro. I think Alessandro is probably off at the moment. It's a way to find out. But I mean, we've obviously had various things going on, and I think Ukraine war and the war in Iran have also been two big things with regards to kind of the shifting pattern of cyber crime, right? I think I don't know if anyone knows much about that between us.
There was a time when the finger was squarely pointed at Ukraine as a hotbed for illicit cyber activity, targeting mostly European and I guess American companies. I'm not sure how much the war has affected that. You would guess that it must have had some effect. But then we're probably going back more like 10 years than 5 years. And I can only safely assume that it has to do with a very high level of technology competence that sits in places like Ukraine, because you're not going to do it from someone like me will not do it from their own laptop. So,
but it's interesting that whether or not it changes after this war. I think that's a really interesting question, because I think a lot of people have forgotten that. All right, I'm gonna hand it back to David, and let's see if we can.
Yeah. So. Ali, just to continue back, we were just talking about whether sort of the war in Ukraine and the war in Iran have influences on what's been happening with cybercrime, cyber attacks, and so on.
Yes, definitely. Both two wars have had an impact on, say, the frequency and the severity of the incident that we've seen. If you start from, Russia and Ukraine, before the war started in 2022, there was a lot of, bad actors from Russia. And, in Russia, there's a fine line between, bad actor and state-sponsor actor, right? So I would say it's quite a bit, a very fine line. So the two things can actually go together, although unofficially. And there was a lot of, Russian bad actors that were, doing a lot of ransomware across Europe, the US. As soon as the war started, the cyber capability of Russia were diverted, from the bad actor, but from the state actor against the infrastructure and the company in Ukraine. And the resource this group had is not infinitive, so they're basically focusing mostly on one country to be able to use cyber as another weapon against the country. As a result of it, we saw definitely a sharp reduction in number of incidents and frequency and severity outside Ukraine. However, after a bit of time, when I think all the countries in Europe were taking a position and the US were taking position against what Russia was doing in Ukraine, cyber was again used as a weapon to try to shift support from Ukraine into Russia, especially in a way that was focusing a lot against the infrastructure of the country. There was, few examples that, in Italy, the railway system was hacked, the German one was hacked. So a kind of, messaging from a country saying, look, you're supporting another country during the war. Look at what I can do if you don't change, your mind. It's the kind of political pressure influencing their position for the war. Especially on infrastructure, meaning also energy, and in some cases also, financial institution as well. So this is all to say that, the geopolitical situation does influence a lot how, the actor behave. What happened the same in Iran, what we saw that there was an increased cyber activity. However, the penetration of cyber insurance in the Middle East is quite lower compared to other places. So we know less of, because not many companies buy insurance, and most of the cyber activity was direct against Israel. But historically, Israel is one of the top countries in cybersecurity, with a lot of innovation, startup. The defense system and the defense capability are huge on the cybersecurity side. So the impact on Israel was relatively less. There was also a case, because when you think about Middle East, you might think that the cyber incident are actually directed in the area, but in reality, it's mostly like a global exposure, because there was a company called Skyper. This again, public knowledge, that provides medical device to hospital in globally in the US as well. It's based in Ireland, but it's got most of the demand that the service is actually in the US. So after the US and Israel decide to attack Iran, an Iran affiliate group has actually hacked this company, creating some downstream disruption to the hospital, most of the US hospital, or some of the European offices as well. And this was clearly motivated by political reason to give a sign to the US or to other and its ally that they can do this and they can disrupt the country even remotely. The downstream impact on the hospital, that it was a little bit material, say that to delay some appointments. In some case they couldn't afford some of the operation. And if you think at the way they did it, they didn't ask for any ransom. They got into the system of the company via a third-party provider, and what they did, they deployed what we call a wiper, basically a system that has wiped the data. So without data, in most of the application, they cannot actually work. So they have to stop, and then sometimes the data lost forever. So you lose a lot of time to rebuild the data. And the irony is that once they got in, they actually did not deploy their own software. They used the software of the company to launch it and wipe the data, a lot of data, to an extent that the company has to close at least for a week and send their employees home for a week. So it could not operate and had to basically understand how to deploy the incident response plan or the business continuity plan to be able to continue to provide service. As I said before, this is a typical example of the geopolitical situation that impacts the cyber threat and eventually the cyber insurance. However, again, the company that was acting in this case, they didn't have any cyber insurance.
That's really quite interesting. It exposes one aspect I hadn't quite thought about, which is, we hear about attacking civilian infrastructures, right? So bombs fall onto energy plants and stuff. But really, that's going on. The cyberspace is the space where actually the attack on civilian infrastructure is going on, and in military conflicts, it's going to get worse along. How has sort of AI coming in changed that, or is changing this?
Yeah, I mean, AI it's moving fast. It's definitely going to have an impact definitely on the cyber incidents. We all know that we have this new model that has been released, Mythos, and also Open AI. And what the model can do, they basically can replicate what a human being can do by scanning the company networks and understand known and also unknown vulnerability, because the way at the moment it works, you have an institution that which is a group made by group of IT that release what we call CVE, which means critical vulnerability. And this critical vulnerability has got a degree of importance. The more important they are, the quicker you have to fix it, because they are very critical and material. And some of them they are known, but some of the vulnerability are not known, because when someone produces software or an application, they do some testing, but they cannot do testing for a long time. So they release anyway, even though this software or this application or this system might have a bug in it. So Mythos is able to deploy and understand what are the critical ones that exist, but also to understand some of the vulnerability that they never been used or understood before. At the same time, they can also produce a code or like a command to actually exploit this vulnerability. And the time that Mythos is able to do this is a fraction of the time that a human being can do it. They can discover this in 22 seconds. So the company does not have a lot of the time to react. It's also important to say that company normally they have to patch this vulnerability. And normally the patching capability of a company is also a function of their activity, because patching a system it does require time, but also when you're patching something, you also run the risk to disrupt another system. So you have to deploy slowly to understand the impact of the patching to the system itself, because you might fix something but produce another problem elsewhere. So there is quite a bit of disconnection between what Mythos can discover, the timeline of Mythos, and what is the reaction time of the company to do that. So the thinking at the moment is that unless company can also respond to this threat with some sort of agentic AI that is able to patch at scale and quickly and increase the cybersecurity to prevent actually, some of the bad actors coming in and using, Mythos or other model to breach the company, then it's going to be a bit of, increase of number of incident severity, because especially if, the bad actor are using, Mythos themselves. Now, there are a lot of, restriction about the use of Mythos. There are some export limitation, but at the same time, there are also, some Chinese model which are as good as Mythos, and they're also open source, which means that everyone can access to it. So there's not going to be a lot of time left from now until a bad actor gets his hand on this type of model and deploy this model. So what we're trying to do is basically partner with company to understand what is their security posture against this type of event. So we are asking different type of questions, but we're also asking them to increase the resilience on the attack surface, because patching is not the only answer. The answer is that you need to be good enough to prevent this bad actor to come in. So if we have a good defense from the outside, then they're not going to be able to come in, or they come in at the first layer, the second layer, but not at your core. And the damage that you get is they're going to be less. It is also a question of time until the defense, meaning what the company can use on Mythos, will be kind of ramping up. As I said before, it's always chasing a gap between what the bad actor do and what the company can try to catch up. In this case, it's exactly the same. It's going to be a time where the company will be able at some stage to catch up. Eventually, though, the bad actor is going to go to the next stage. So it's quite interesting. It's very new, but the best way to describe this at the moment is that at the moment we see this model out there is the calm before the storm. So we are expecting some sort of change the pattern from frequency and severity of incident.
So that's kind of, I'm not sure if that's comforting or disconcerting, because it feels like there's this sort of arms race type thing going on, but instead of the bombs being bigger, the time's faster in that way, and it feels a bit like, well, you can possibly see the outcome where somehow things get to be more robust along the way because they're constantly being tested, or equally that is just trying to create kind of really strong castles as a way to try and protect yourself, but that doesn't seem like the right approach. So kind of some radical rethinking might be necessary. Is quantum computing any kind of difference to that? That sounds like something that's very different. What is quantum computing? How would that affect things? Is that how close to reality is that?
Yeah, I mean, quantum, for the benefit of the audience, it's a super powerful, computer. All the computers today, they basically work in a way that, it is analog, meaning that, the computer understands only the 0 and the 1. And then, you have many 0, many 1, and you can do a lot of it. And, the way the computer thinks is binary. It's 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. Now, with quantum, which is used at some of the principles of the quantum physics, and I know you, David, that you have a physics PhD as well. There is a possibility that the electron can take a position, a superposition, meaning that it's not a 0, not a 1, something in the middle for a time, which means that the combination that an electron can be between the 0 and the 1 in the middle as well, in a position which is called superposition, create an infinite number of combinations, which means that the computing power of the computer itself, it is basically astronomically larger, right? It can do operation that before it would take 20 years, now it takes like an hour. So it's definitely something to think about, because together with artificial intelligence and quantum, it's going to be even a much larger exposure for company. The main implication at the moment for quantum computing, which there are a lot of thinking that is going to be coming in 2030, in basically a few years, and this is actually accelerating to some extent, similar to artificial intelligence. We thought that it would come in 10 years, but in reality, all the change are much faster, right? New model come up in months, other than years now. Every 2-3 months, we got an evolution of the model. So I'm thinking that quantum computing is going to be faster and faster. There are some example of it, but the main implication of quantum computing is basically that quantum computer can breach encryption. Any type of encryption, meaning today we use a lot of password, and the password normally are encrypted by systems that are almost unbreachable. They are based on mathematical modeling. Quantum computer can breach any encryption in few seconds. So if you think about your own password, the password from work, but even all the information that they are encrypted, by the states or by the government as secrets. To some extent, there is a lot of talks down then. Some of the Chinese actor, the bad actor, which normally motivated by intellectual property, but also secret, actually stealing information which currently are encrypted and storing the information in an encrypted way, waiting for the quantum computer to be deployed so they can actually go back and look at the information itself. What we're doing there, there are a lot of startups in the UK which they help company to become quantum ready, meaning that they help company to deploy password and system which are not breachable by quantum calculation. So this is going to be something that is going to come the next few months and few years as well, and advise company to start thinking about it, because it will be quite a material impact for company itself.
That's
wow. So that's yeah. There's no point me changing my passwords.
Would I be able to ask a couple of questions before we sort of get to the final ones? Is that all right? So I was just listening to what you were saying, and what you've just said just completely blown my mind, and I'm sure Joe's got some thoughts. But is it normal for to pay ransoms in the case of a cyber attack? Because obviously you hear a lot about we never pay ransoms, but in this situation, is it just normal just to pay the ransom so you can get your business back on track? All right, we've got to pause. All right, did you hear that, Alessandro?
Can you hear me?
Yep. Did you hear my question? All right, let's see if you can you hear us? All right, lost him.
I can take a gander at that. I mean, basically, when you think about how complicated it is to solve a problem like your data going missing, it's complicated. When your data is actually being hidden away from you or being locked away from you, that can be critical. So the chances that they are going to want to solve it as a problem, the motivation for it is very high. And I think it's not the same as parents or governments saying we won't deal with kidnappers. So Alessandro, I don't know if you heard the question. It was about how common is it for companies to pay ransoms?
Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yeah, now you're back.
All right, maybe I've got yep, go. Sorry.
So the question was around ransom payments. What do the company have? Do want to pay ransom or not? I think first and most importantly, paying ransom, it is not forbidden by a lot of jurisdiction. So the company has an option to decide if they want to pay the ransom. Of course, no company like to pay a ransom because there are money outside of their revenue and profits. So it becomes almost an economical decision in the sense that if you have good backup, if you have good, security standard, if you have, encrypted your data, so even if the data that's left your organization, they're encrypted so that they are of no use. If you are able to deploy your continuity plan, then the incentive to pay ransom is less, clearly. However, I've been seeing a lot of cases where the company position was at the beginning of the incident said, okay, no, we don't pay ransom, because there's also a moral element of it, right? You are basically paying the ransom and you're fostering some of this organization. But in reality is that when you go through the incident, you understand the impact of the incident, and in some case, pay the ransom is actually the only option you have. Otherwise, you might be paying, the consequence and the interruption for months and months. And this, you need to understand that, this, if you're down for a long time, there's a social impact to your employees as well, because they're unable to work, you don't produce revenue, and, the company take the decision to pay. Just to be clear, we partner with specialist company that negotiate with a bad actor and normally help the company to make the payments in cryptocurrency. As I said before, the decision to pay is mostly like an economical decision. In some case, company decide to take a hit, not to pay. However, they might change their mind because the impact can be so critical that there's no other option.
Yeah, right. And the other thing that I was going to ask you about was when you were talking about the Iranian cyber attack on the Irish company. It was an inconvenience, right? But nobody died. But as a country, if it wanted to accelerate its attacks, it's a pretty clear sign that it can get anyone anywhere. And obviously, it's a warning shot, but it wasn't a devastating warning shot other than economically and data and all that sort of stuff. But how easy would it be for that to have escalated where medical infrastructure was impacted, where people would die? I mean, it just seems like the next obvious. Then you're talking about quantum, and that's just a whole other level. Do you know what I mean? It would be easy to accelerate it.
I haven't. Yeah. If you can repeat the question, because I haven't understood the question, because there was some.
So yeah, So you break. Okay, we're having a bit of a meltdown. All right. So yeah. the Irish example seemed like a bit of a soft touch from a cyber warfare perspective, right? But I can imagine
we've lost him. But he's going to connect back, I'm sure. But I think some elements that I'm finding that I hadn't really thought through before. The first is this element that actually this is different from other sort of ransoms. In other cases of ransom, if someone kind of kidnapped Richard, I'm going to feel terrible, but my life can still carry on. And Richard is the one who can't carry on. So there's a choice of me, do I pay the ransom or not? But I can still carry on. But in the case where your company is actually being hijacked in that way, the company cannot carry on. And as Alessandro was talking about, and in the case of Jaguar, there are all the other supplying companies, and there are all the customers, and there are all the staff and everyone else, and their lives cannot carry on. So it's very much connected in that way.
But then you take it up to the sort of the other level where we're talking about the AI. So to me, it sounds like a great sales pitch for Claude. You've got to get Claude Mythos, because if you don't hear it, it's great. But then quantum. So for the little guy, rather than just the big companies, which I'm sure is who Alessandro works for, the little guy must, like, you think of those future risks. You see the scam. I sat next to an old fella with his daughter who'd been scammed, which is really, really common in Asia, old people losing everything. But you think about this sort of future. It's Alessandro's back, but his screen's blank, so I'm presuming he's having trouble getting on. But Joe, what do you think?
Well, the thing about this, I was thinking about how difficult it is to try to insure yourself. I mean, to be an insurer. I was wondering what's the incentive there? Because ultimately, this is not about insuring against something that is going away or getting less frequent. So like how weather is becoming uninsurable. I think cyber security threats are becoming uninsurable as well, because I mean that's where I would say it is, or the premiums must be going through the roof, right?
Yeah.
Because or your declaration on pre-existing conditions, or the conditions, like you're gonna have pre-existing conditions. You're gonna be outs for insurers where you go like, oh, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, or you didn't have this particular protocol in place. Because it's a matter of time rather than whether or not it's going to happen. Because if you I don't know how many of you actually set up your routers and yourself and actually look at the number of attacks daily that come into every single person's computer. I don't know whether you realize that you are constantly being sussed out or tested for hacking. People are trying to get into your system all the time in an automated way, right? So this is happening for you, and you as individuals. I mean, like for myself, I don't think I carry much data that's very useful to anybody, that's going to be very valuable. But this is the scale at which it's happening. It's happening en masse all the time, automatically. The foraging is happening all the time, looking for exploits.
And it's going to get worse, right?
It's gonna hit. It's just gonna hit, and all we hear about right now are those companies that are willing to share the information. Because the thing that really is happening is sometimes it's a lot easier to just pay it and move along. And if you're purely from a business perspective, if you take your ego out of it, if you want to reduce friction, sometimes the negotiation to pay the ransom actually just completely makes sense. So good hackers, if there is such a thing, the ones who go like, okay, I can bring a problem to you and I can offer you a good value solution, and you want to and you'll move on from there, right? If you have a I suppose leadership that is able to take the learning from a process and move on and go quickly. I think what is upsetting to hear for most people is that it actually makes sense for a lot of companies who get hit by a ransomware attack to just immediately pay it and get on with it and fix it and grow up, put on the big boy pants and move on.
Yeah.
There are a couple of things that for me strikes me very much in an economic perspective, because this is what I think will happen. We've heard stories about Pentagon moving away from digital storage back to physical storage, the sort of inner sanctum of the real secrets that sits at Pentagon is not on any server or any computer. It's all in analog written format. That has implications for productivity. If you're going back to a paper system, you are going to slow down a lot of the gains that have driven economic prosperity over the last 20, 30 years. And surely my first instinct when I hear Alessandro describing these things must be some kind of move towards a submarine solution where you can get flooded in one compartment but still operate in sort of a decentralized cutoff solution where you have no access to everything but only parts of the operation. And that way you can you can take a hit, but you can still stay afloat and continue to operate in some kind of normality. Surely that must be the most natural way to progress for companies, because to me it seems very clearly that the threat level is going up day by day, given the computing power is increasing day by day.
Yeah. I mean, just last week, and Andy Milroy, who's been on the show before, and some other friends of mine, they're all cybersecurity experts. And when they talk about preparedness for business, right, it's actually quite shocking how unprepared companies are. And now we've got these new risks that are coming so quickly. And like Alessandro was saying, quantum is expected within a couple of years. So there's another whole layer of risk. And I know, Joe, you've talked about it before, but I'm sure the Singapore government is getting ready. I'm sure the Israeli government is getting ready. But the fact that the Pentagon has to have analog data because it's at risk, that's kind of tells you the sign of where we are and what we're ready for. And then you think about just the average person or the small business owner. What's our chance in this new fight? You know?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think there's two things here. I think the first thing I want to bring back out is Andrea's comment about Ireland and that example, and essentially the vulnerability of critical civilian infrastructure.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the more important aspect that I hadn't really thought about in that way. We hear in the news about bombing Iran and knocking down kind of power stations or bombing bridges in Ukraine and stuff, and talking about you cannot attack civilian infrastructure. But actually, our civilian infrastructure is entirely open in that sense. That's very sad. Do you want to raise a question again to Alessandro?
So let's see if we've got him back. I know we've had some troubles. I'm glad you haven't given up on us.
Sorry, I had to change device and network as well. So it's an irony that talking about cyber, I cannot actually connect. But anyway,
like I said, the extreme heat's been having an impact. But one of the questions, I'll just take you off the screen for a minute. But when you were talking about the Irish scenario where the Iranians attacked the Irish medical device company, to me that really struck me as from a war perspective as a soft touch. It was an inconvenience, but it was still a soft touch because I would presume nobody died, right? But it's also a flag to say, if you guys keep misbehaving, we can do a hell of a lot worse here, and we can do it anywhere, and we can kill a lot of people. So to me, that when you were telling me that story, it sort of, the risk was actually much greater. That was just like a warning signal, I suppose. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, definitely. This is, as I said before, it's a way to make a signal or to influence, change behavior, to just give a warning, say, hey, watch out, I can do this, but I can actually do more than that. So you're better off, kind of leaving me alone, or don't do what you're doing, type of things. And this is, it can be done in a very different way. There was another case, for example, back few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, there was a cyber attack on one of the infrastructure company in the US. And this was definitely, done by some of the Russian bad actor. And it was one of the few cases that where, the FBI managed actually to recover, the ransom. They went through a lot of, exchange to be able to trace the cryptocurrency and recover it. And it was definitely, done by the Russian to an extent that, the US had to make a strong warning to Russia, saying, you shouldn't do this again, because critical infrastructure, in some case, and this is a huge debate, what can constitute an act of war, right? Because if I'm a state and then I go and disrupt the financial system or the healthcare system of a country, is this considered to be, so hostile that, to an extent that is actually an act of war and countries should respond to it, and Article 42 of NATO should actually be applicable or not? There's a huge debate about that, because at the end of the day, as you rightly say, yes, cyber can be used as like, a soft touch, but can also be used as like a big weapon as well, right? You can disrupt a country easily, right? If you attack the infrastructure, and we've seen to some extent this, on the Ukraine as well. There was a lot of cyber attack, on the financial system, on the infrastructure. So, the more you do it, the more you can use it. It can be done remotely. You don't need anyone on the ground, right? So there's not so much impact of your army. It's basically a cyber army. They can sit anywhere, and they can actually disrupt the whole country, the whole economy of a country with very little effort.
It's interesting. All right, how much time have you got, Alessandro? I know we booked you for an hour, so I just want to double check how much time you've got. Do you need to jump off in at the top of the hour, or? All right, David, I'll hand it over to you. Maybe questions. All right, you're on mute.
Yeah. So I think
I cannot hear you now.
Okay. Yeah. So assuming you still got time to stay with us, so the thing that has been very much on the news, and here we talked about businesses and stuff, and the other thing, of course, the thing that's been very much on the news are data centers. So are data centers themselves kind of like vulnerable in this way, or is there much insurance against them? How does that actually work? I'd like to know if my photos in the cloud are going to disappear.
No?
I don't know if you caught what I asked. Can you hear me now, Ali?
He's got some other connectivity issues.
Yeah.
Right.
But folding back on what you said about an attack on one is an attack on all. To me, as a layman and not someone with a legal background, it's pretty clear that the cyber attack is like any other attack, an attack of war. I can't see how you're going to argue the opposite. If I come from outside and I attack NATO's infrastructure, I attack NATO's social structure, the hospitals, the education, the law enforcement, whatever I can penetrate, of course it's an act of war. How can it not be interpreted as an act of war?
That's
why
I say
inconceivable to me.
But that's why I say we've been at war for more than a decade.
Yeah.
But it's not seen in that way, though. I mean, the way I would go about an attack, right, is you go along and you start attacking, Sainsbury's, one of the biggest supermarkets.
Yeah.
You attack information.
Right. And you basically empty the shelves.
Yeah.
And that's not seen as an act of war, but that's the whole thing about the civilian infrastructure.
Yeah.
You attack Boots, the chemist. So you can't get your prescriptions. And you're now in a situation where you can't get the food, you can't get the prescriptions. But neither Sainsbury's nor Boots are considered as a critical infrastructure.
Correct.
They will be when they're not available. All right, Alessandro, because we're aware of time. So David was just asking about data center resilience, and obviously we're looking at extreme heat events, and it's not. Is that part of the risk profile that you deal with as well?
Yes, I mean there are two, different. Data center. Data center already exists, and a lot of cloud providers, they use already data center. Plus, we have now a huge focus on building new data center, but by the hyperscaler, which means that the company that are deploying and creating all the new AI model. Because artificial intelligence does require a huge amount of computational power. So when we speak to clients, we understand the way they use the cloud, because the cloud, most of the cloud data are actually in data center, and we also speak to some of the cloud company to understand the security profile of the data center. However, this is very simple to understand. The more you put all the egg in one basket, the worse is the consequence of a cyber event. If one of the cloud provider goes down, basically a lot of companies will go down at the same time. We've seen this many, happening, right, where, in the past, when some of the cloud provider, or even sometimes some of the software provider. If you think about for example, some software like SAP, SAP is basically embedded into a lot of company, right? So if you think about that, one bad actor could come into SAP and change the software code, which gets released to millions of companies worldwide. This will create a huge cyber incident across a lot of countries, a lot of companies. So for us, this is, represent what we call a cat event, right? Which is the equivalent of a catastrophic event in property, right? Like a big, US storm. For us will be, we have 10 or 15 scenario that, we always look and update, every year. In terms of, data center, the one that, they are building at the moment, they're still on the construction phase, which means that there is no actually so much cyber exposure there because they're not being operated yet. There are no information in there. They are just building it. The one that exists as well. We have we do some assessment there. There is resilience, and especially for the very large one, because most of the time the data center or all the data center are basically segregated from each other. They have redundancy, so if one data center doesn't work, you can shift the traffic to another data center. However, there's always going to be a risk that some of these contingency don't actually work. So you might have, an impact of, the data center going down, and the cloud kind of goes down, and the company using the cloud, they go down as well. If you think about, the world, the digital world today, the best way that, I can describe it is like, the London Tube, right? The London Tube operate at capacity, right? So everything, works, but if something goes off, everything has got a lot of downstream event, and everything kind of, we have consequence everywhere because operate at capacity is no resilience. So the data center worldwide is the same. They operate at capacity, they have a bit of resilience, but if something goes wrong, then, they can actually stop a country working, right? We have several examples where people could not use the banking system, they could not actually money out of a bank, right? And this was just because one of the cloud providers had 2, 3, 4, 5 years and hours, downtime. So it's quite scary, and we always think about the war continuity, right? And the world is going to continue in this way, but in reality, few single event or few single things go sideways can create a huge disruption, and maybe most people don't actually understand this.
I can translate for the kids. You don't get TikTok for 30 minutes at a time, and there's no way of getting in. Yeah.
I would actually welcome it, right? Because
I think we all would. David, do you want to ask a final question? Because we've gone over time with Alessandro, and I'm sure.
I think you mentioned about kind of the climate and the weather and the power and all the rest of it, and they obviously matter along the way. But in some sense, when you talk of insurance, who is really insuring it? So who you talked about the transfer of the risk and so on. So who's really paying up? Who's really at the back of all of this?
You mean
it's Elon, isn't it? It's Elon, right?
Yeah.
Everything goes back to him. So there is, as I said, an insurance market. There are, several companies that, offer cyber insurance. Clearly, every insurance company, to some extent, have to hedge their risk as well, right? So there are, some called reinsurers, which is basically an insurance of the insurance. And then in some case, there's also what we call a retro market, which is basically their insurance of their insurance, right? So basically like a layer of, three. You have your fronting insurance company, then you have their insurer, and then you have the retro, right? So the chain is quite long. For example, at Beazley, and I was mentioning before about, we assess our aggregation because, if we insure a lot of companies that they use the same system or the same cloud, you have the risk that one event can create, like, a big storm in the US can create an aggregate losses in our balance sheet. So what we do, we have to hedge ourselves, and we buy what we call reinsurance, so basically a protection for our balance sheet if something goes really, really wrong. We were the first one in 2022 also to issue a cat bond for cyber, which was quite innovative, which means that you have an event definition. Most like typical example will be the cloud goes down, and if the loss goes over a certain amount, then it gets the bond at the end, but for which we pay a yield to the investors, then the bot get triggered, and then so we get the money to kind of protect ourselves. We have this is also public, about $1 billion of this protection, because the balance sheet of Beazley isn't huge enough to absorb all the aggregation of this event. Having said that, some of at the moment, right, in terms of cat event, something that would produce a loss that we consider to be catastrophic in terms of cyber has not happened yet, and so it's very difficult to see how the reaction of the insurance, the retro market would react to this type of event. I'm not hoping that it's going to happen, but it's always like a probability that at some stage things go very wrong in a day.
So one final part on this, because I'm hearing is in some ways the repeat of the 2008 kind of situation of sort of CDO squares and stuff, because everything goes in the cloud, everything ends up going back in the data center, and all the financial companies themselves are all involved in that way, and everything else. So in some sense, there is this aspect of the fact that it's all dependent on what, all the insurance ends up being dependent on the functioning of the thing you're trying to insure. Are we entering into that situation? And then, of course, 2008 was kind of how that happened, right? Sort of the story of 2008 was that mortgage lending became the driver towards more money for mortgage lending itself. And so the whole thing became dependent on the mortgages and the property staying around well enough. And if that went, then everything toppled with it. And so in this case, we're trying to ensure a cyber infrastructure that actually is the basis on which a lot of the insurance and the reinsurers and the backers do that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. There is a huge interdependency, right, on the cyber infrastructure, on what we do. Typical example, like a lot of insurance company, they use cloud, right? We use cloud, right? And because it's very standard, nowadays that most of the data and the application you have, they are on a cloud. So if the cloud goes down, it's going to also impact us. So there's a dependency there. I don't think it's exactly the same as the mortgage back asset security, what happened in 2008, because there it was mostly kind of thinking that the market is going to grow in terms of the house price, etc. However, as I said before, if there is a cyber event, and because the world is all interconnected, between the client, between we normally sell to brokers, between ourselves, and between several companies we insure at the same time, it's gonna potentially create disruption, but also losses for the insurance markets. So it is something that we think all the time, as I said before, because the balance sheet that we have is not big enough to sustain huge losses, so we have to hedge for it. But then it becomes a chain as well, right? We are passing the risk to other financial institutions, etc. So at some stage, the loss might be good, not so big that even the protection that you have or the market itself cannot actually absorb it, right?
Yeah. It's all really sobering. I think it's
Totally.
one way to describe this. Richard, Joe, Andrea, any kind of thoughts, last words?
Well, I don't know if this is relevant, but we've got ISEF. It says INCEF projects in South Africa, sort of talking about. I'm presuming it's the dark web, that we need to shut it down. And I don't know if that's sort of part of this story. Is it part of this story?
So, I mean, the dark web, it is, as the name suggests, like basically an internet network which is not visible to most of the public, where people can easily be anonymized. They can exchange and sell, anything you want, from weapon to information, cryptocurrency, you name it, right? It is also the place where, hacker exchange information, or you might dump, the data of a company. You've just stolen it and trying to sell it to someone else, and you can sell credit cards. It is basically the equivalent of a black market, right? So that think about eBay, but where you can buy anything illegal that you want to buy, right? Or you can also try to, if I'm a bad actor and I want to hack a company, I can also trying to see in the dark web if someone has got stolen credential, has got access to the company, they know a way in. So you can do anything you want there. I mean, you can shut it down, assuming it is possible, but as history tells us, right, whenever you have an official market, most of the time, if you put restriction, there's always like a black market coming in. And this happens only with a lot of, whatever is illegal, normally, if you put a restriction, alcohol, if you ban cigarette, I'm sure it's going to be, back in Italy in the 80s, there was, the cigarette were selling by the states, but it was an illegal dark market where people was trading cigarettes, right? So this is exactly the same. If you stop them, and you even are able, which is quite difficult, to block the dark web, then this market is going to shift to another infrastructure. It's going to be exactly the same. So I think it's going to be almost impossible to do that.
Okay, so whack-a-mole. All right. Look,
Yeah.
we've had more than an hour of your time, so like I don't know.
Chris, thank you very much. We really enjoyed the conversation. Sorry, I had some technical issue being in the cyber industry.
We've taken some insurance.
Exactly.
We have made this real. Right.
We appreciate
Always
it.
good
Thank
to
you so much.
thank you so much for coming. It's always good to keep our feet firmly on the ground, right? So
Yeah. Yes.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. And,
Okay. Thank you. Enjoy your
thank
day.
you.
Bye.
You
Bye.
too.
Thank you, Alessandro.
Bye.
All right. So that was fascinating.
Yeah, it's a bit scary. Let's be honest.
Yeah, but that's our motto. Look it in the eye, right?
Of course.
And I when I talk to my cybersecurity mates, just like who you met last week, even though that's not what we were talking about, like it just feels like it feels like the climate. No one's getting ready.
No. It's like everything else. I mean, we operate on the basis that it will be okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think if you the thing about something like this, like anything else, actually, when you're just prepared several steps ahead, is you do sound like the crazy guy. So, like the topic that we've sold that we're going to talk about today was the CEO meltdown, right? I mean, of Palantir. I was I was watching it and really not getting the same vibes I think most people were getting, because he seemed. He seemed unhinged. He seemed more frantic than everybody else, but that's because his perspective is 3-4 steps down the road. So he is to this conversation, I think, he is to the AI conversation pretty much what we just had an experience with cybersecurity.
Yeah. To me, when I listen to him, I think he's on whatever Musk's on.
Can I have some?
Yeah. No, ketamine, right? It's got that frantic sort of changing direction. Did you, Richard and David? Did you have a chance to listen to it, because it got a lot of attention?
Yeah, I honestly I couldn't finish. I started and I said, this is completely incoherent. I'm just going to get annoyed here.
Yeah. But I've also been in the tech industry long enough to know that I've sat in rooms with people like that, where they do that, and it's like Trump's weave, right?
Yeah, but it's basically ADHD on steroids, right?
Totally, right?
You're completely incapable of focusing your mind for longer than 2 seconds.
Yeah,
it's really annoying.
But the other thing that happens with people like that is the people who are sitting in the room are like, I can't keep up with this person, but they're really, really smart, so I believe them. So people don't question them, they don't challenge them, and they sit in homage at their feet because they're really, really smart. I've been in so many rooms in the tech world like that. And it didn't used to be as bad as it is now, but it was always like that in the tech world. So I think a lot of the people who are covering the tech oligarchy, the nerdrock, and using those sort of terms, they were there at the beginning when I was, and we're already sort of going, hey, wait a minute, we've got a problem here. And now we're seeing where the problem's going. So, but yeah, it's interesting what you just said, Joe. Different perspective. Should we get on to some massive stories in the news?
Sobering news.
No. So, mate, the biggest news in the world right now is, of course, Taylor Swift is getting married in Madison Square Garden is closed down.
Yeah, I've got my invitation, but I'm not supposed to say anything about it. You know.
Yeah. I wish them well. And we also had a couple of Russian nationals get on top of whatever tower it was with the sign. Apparently, they got engaged, and the sign said, "With the power of love beats the love of power. The world knows peace." I personally, I think it's a great message, and you'll be pleased to know that the final person that was exposed to hantavirus has now left quarantine, so that is no longer a risk. So that's good. Before we got on, I was asking Richard and David if it was still hot, and so it's cooled down, and now it's starting to heat up again. So the heat story is just bonkers. Donald Trump tomorrow night is promising to do a July 4th address. He said, I'm going to do a long address, basically to prove that he can hack it. Anyway,
we can only hope.
Well,
yes,
maybe
exactly.
he'll get a heat stroke along the way.
Well, I wasn't going to say it out loud, but one of the reports I did want to bring to everyone's attention. So just today, I saw a report from Spain that 1,200 people have died. There's a widely used number across Europe, which is 1,300 of people have died. But a report from a group called Zenodo are saying that the death toll just from this June event, not from the last one before it, just from this June event, is more than 20,000 excess deaths. So, the problem with heat deaths, and I see it all the time, more people die from cold. It's not true. More people die from death. We just don't measure it. And if 20,000
hang on,
people...
what you just said was more people die from death, which is a truism.
Thank you for picking me up.
The leading cause of death is death.
Yeah. That's very good.
The leading consequence of death is death.
Yeah, so more than 20,000, and that's just that one. So there's a new one coming. But thoughts on what you're saying?
I think we shouldn't think of it in terms of the actual death. I think things like heat causes more heart problems because it causes circulation problems. So the burden on health and healthcare and health services is huge. And if you focus on the death, it kind of makes you feel actually it's not going to be you.
Yeah. No,
it is going to be you in lots of different ways. If you do a job where you're constantly busy and you can't drink enough, you can't hydrate enough, you're going to end up with a kidney problem. You're going to end up with a circulation problem, even though you may not die in that way. Yeah,
in some ways, it's better to die than to have long-term kidney dialysis because your kidneys were so damaged from heat extremes, right? The other thing that's come out is youth suicide rates go up in heat waves, which I hadn't seen that. So there's a US statistic, basically kids aged 15 to 24, psychologically much more vulnerable. And interestingly, it's more of the females, 5.2%. Every 1 degree of warming compared to males, which is 2.37%. And it's because a younger body doesn't know how to cool down as well. The EU deal, obviously, we're hearing a lot of talk about the lefties versus the righties and the politicization of the air conditioner. But actually, it's a lot more nuanced than that, the conversation. And I think the Euronews, I'll put it in the comments, have released the EU's Green Deal faces crucial summer tests. That's the title. But it's not that people are against air conditioning. It's that the Green New Deal is about reducing emissions. And obviously, if you bring air conditioning in, you're going to increase the emissions. And they're saying there's so many other things we can be doing, and we're going to jump here. But basically the final point is we have to do everything because we're at an adaptation phase. Did anyone have a chance to read that piece?
I did.
Well, I did.
Yeah.
I didn't read it, but yeah, I'll let someone who read it first go ahead. I've got
All
something else to add to that.
All right.
Yeah.
I think we have to say we have to do everything that makes sense to do.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I think the idea of we have to do everything gets people to start saying about how, you know, data centers out of space is the way to solve the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah. Richard?
Yeah, I read it, and I didn't perceive it very much as a right-left debate. I perceive it fundamentally. You cannot have it all, but people refuse to accept it in general, and politicians in particular refuse to accept that very fact. You cannot have it all. Now start thinking there, and then you peel back the onion and say, what is it that really matters here? It doesn't make sense for everyone to have an air conditioner at home because none of them will work. We're going to blow out the whole grid in no time.
Mm.
So you're already operating in this world of constraints. So clearly you're going to focus on having air conditioning in the places that really matters. Hospitals, education if you can, public transport, etc., where you're shifting a lot of people in a very tight space, so you get the most bang for the buck. In your home, start looking at what you can do without air condition to lower the temperature. Because even though you might be able to afford it and plug it in, if your neighbor does the same, you're going to blow the grid up. Start thinking about how you operate in a world with constraints and go from there. And in the minds of politicians, this discussion doesn't exist. Let us be very clear about that, because they're focusing on providing all these things as cheaply as possible for the people. I mean, go figure that out. That's just a world that is so alien to me. It's scary.
Mm. Yeah, right. Joe?
No, I learned about this particular situation actually through my wife. She mentioned something, and I heard the bias in what she was saying, and it completely made sense. And from a Singaporean perspective, it was an American viewpoint that was criticizing the French mayor, and I think the whole story was how the French mayor came out with guns ablaze, basically pushing back really hard. But it was not like someone who was making sense. It was more like, what is this Karen going on about? I mean, that's just the vibe I got. And I realized that, you know, it's because if you don't know enough about what's happening, you really don't have the empathy for what's going on. So it sounds like the French have had this terrible outcome because they have stuck to their guns about certain principles and certain rules. And then when I said that actually what's happened with France is that terrible things have happened because of the heat wave currently, and how they have tried to do things with nuclear power, and a lot of ideas that were supposed to have worked pretty well have actually come now to bite them in the bum, so to speak, right? I mean, it's the thing that stops them from using air conditioning. So it's not a case of like, we don't want you to use air conditioning because we feel you don't want, we feel you can't use it, shouldn't use it. It's just like, you know, what, the grid's down by 40% power, 60% down on power. We can't. It's just not something we can do. The grid wasn't designed for it. We're suffering the consequences of it. And I think, you know, again, from a Western perspective, or at least an even more Western perspective, as in the American perspective, they don't have the sense of what it feels like to be in a place where you might not be able to turn on it's not like they won't experience power shortages or whatever it is, but the sense of you can just turn on the air conditioning is that privilege, right? And so as my wife and her friends who are Singaporean were looking at this, that was the perspective that they gathered behind as well, because it made complete sense. The French position seemed very unhinged, but and then the difficulty was, of course, saying more about it and bringing in more information, and I was sounding like the unhinged one at the table, trying to say that, there's all this other stuff to think about as well, and blah 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 blah. And then by the end of it all, I was waving a Greenpeace flag in the back while I was speaking.
So, you know,
always ends there.
Yeah, I just want to add. I think there's another flavour to this, because what Richard was saying was right. So the article which I've just shared, to me, there's a media representation of the story, which is the left versus right conversation, right? But actually, one of the stories that I think is much more interesting that's coming out of this scenario is France is the best prepared of the European nations. Well, I mean, the more southern countries like Italy, Spain, Portugal are used to more extreme heat. But as far as preparations go, France is one of the best prepared. They've done the most, the green lanes, they've planted trees, they've gotten cars off the road. They've done an amazing amount of work. They've got the cooling centers. And actually, to me, what this heat wave has signified is that they are still underestimating how much more serious they need to take it. And so the grid infrastructure is a classic one, right? So I saw at the end, we're not going to have time to go. Bangkok has been warned that basically it could be underwater within a decade. That's not that far away. And they're now in the process of putting their electrical grid under the ground. So if you go in most places in Asia, especially if you get out of places like Singapore, all the grid is above the ground. Now, in extreme heat events, when the grid's above the ground, it starts to sag and melts and spark fires and all that sort of stuff. And that's how your grid goes down, right? So first of all, Bangkok's going to put its grid underground, but at the same time, its grid's going to be underground and then it's going to get washed away. So I think it's just the actuaries have been saying, talking about the preparation that's needed, and the conservative science is saying, oh, we're not going to hit that until 2050, 2100. So governments are in lockstep with these predictions, which are too cautious. And therefore, what we're seeing is a lack of preparation, not because they haven't wanted to, but because they've been paying attention to the wrong information. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think there's another problem.
Who's first?
I think there's a problem bigger than that. And that's the idea that somehow we get it right just because we do it. So all of these things, what Richard was describing is the fact that this is how we got it wrong because we didn't know everything. People are now going on thinking, oh, we do this, it'll be okay, and so on, and all the rest. And this is where I think a lot of the call for, make science great again kind of thing gets it completely wrong. Science doesn't get it right in that way. And things get to be right after lots of failures. And so the reality we're going to face is that whatever we try is going to fail. And what we need is a mindset that can accept that as the way forward. And we don't have that at all. Our mindset is somehow we have to fix it and that's going to be done. And that's the last thing that's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the scientists are starting to communicate that too. Joe, did you want to say something?
Well, I was going to say how this thing about being right, it's really difficult because circumstances make you right in your decisions or whatever. I mean, like when I was younger, I invested to some way too much in insurance until I was right. It's one of those things. You can invest in something because you think, okay, there's a risk of that. And over time, it becomes something not as useful. So, I mean, and I would say the way insurance has worked for me and otherwise is that we have had some insurance investments that have worked out really well because of our so the circumstances made us right, and some others that didn't quite work out because same rules applied, right? Because whatever happened in the end is what basically produced an opinion or at least a verdict about your investment. So that is always challenging. And I was actually about to say before, the trouble with the stuff that we need to do to prepare for things like this is it's very hard to show you what it looks like, right? So this is the like infrastructure. If Thailand does all the work and it puts all its infrastructure, it's all underground, you literally can't show anybody what you've done. It's not there to be seen as like, ta-da! What do we have here? It's a flat room. There's nothing in it. You go, okay. So it's one of those things. It's sometimes about how we are incapable, or at least as a larger group, I think, incapable understanding or being able to comprehend things that we can't see and feel and experience. And also, there's the other part of it, which is what I tend to be talking about, is the storytelling part of it. As in, there's a lack. You've talked about the lack of imagination. I think there's a lack of the employment of imagination. You need to use the imagination of the people to begin to understand and begin to see things, and then to begin to feel things. So if you don't employ imagination, what's going to happen is that the stuff that's happening right now as well goes by without people really getting and going, oh, that's what it was. They just go, oh, it's something else. So like for the stats and the reason why the US feels very differently about the heat, dangers of heat, as opposed to what Europe does, has a lot to do with how stats are actually kept in the US, medical stats. So you talk about cause of death or things that lead to death. There is more data that's kept about the impact of heat and resulting in death in the European way of looking at things than in the US way of looking at things. So in the US, you get a whole lot of medical stuff that happens. So yes, you might get more heart conditions. You might have those things maybe might show up, but they don't track it back to the heat event. So that's again statistical blindness, right? And whether intentional or otherwise, maybe it's driven by the insurance company. Who knows, right? I mean, there are always different reasons for different things.
All right, so I want to challenge you in a couple of things you just said there, Joe. So first of all, I was just listening to a podcast with the lady who's publishing a book talking about climate scientists, and how they've been communicating, right? And basically, none of them would go on the record to tell her what they really truly thought as far as the future we're heading towards, right? And there's a whole bunch of them that now won't even go on the media anymore because there's no point. So the scientists have always been sharing the truth about the risks. And so people like Richard, David and I have been paying attention to it. We can see it and we're trying to communicate it. And trust me, it's not a good place to be because people don't want to hear it and you get a lot of pushback. And we're all trying to work out how can I tell this story in a way that people want to hear so that they change their behaviors and act. And like David's saying, the acceptance of what is actually coming is a big part of the path ahead, but it's a very hard thing to do. So there's a challenge with the communication, what's been communicated. The scientists haven't been wrong, but they're conservative in what they're communicating. If you actually look at, there's always different extremes in what they're communicating. So this is one possible path. These are all the other possible paths, right? Everyone wants to focus on the easiest path when we're way off those. But like, the example of Bangkok, right? Is a classic for me, right? Okay, so the Thai government's got the information. Bangkok's going to be under the ocean within 10 years. It would be a massive waste of copper. So we need to dig up as much copper as we've dug up in all of human history to do the sustainable energy revolution. So it's an impossible transformation. There's not enough copper, right? We should not be wasting a single inch of copper based on what's going to actually happen in the environment. So if they're going to spend that money to do that in Bangkok, knowing that within 10 years it's going to be overrun by the sea, then that's just a stupid waste of money. We know that pockets will be lined in the process, but that's the sort of thing that we've got to start thinking about, right? That is what we've got to start thinking about. Like, what's the best decision? Like, in Phuket, it's getting massive floods at the moment. Well, of course, it's getting massive floods at the moment because it's chopped down all its forests. It's covered in concrete as they build these new villas for wealthy peoples who will eventually have to escape because it's going to be too hot to bloody live there. It's just stupid. They've destroyed the environment to make for a short-term financial gain that's making it miserable for people who were living there. And now they're dealing with yet another flooding event, which is all man-made. It's just this constant stupidity and short-term thinking. We know where it's all going, so now let's start living within that. I don't know. Thoughts?
Well, One thing that strikes me continuously, right? Joe touched upon it, you did, David did. It's like, I come from a upbringing, kind of a career where I'm never actually really that worried about what happens when things go well. That's the part of the outcome where I really I'm not bothered. I'm always bothered about what happens when things go wrong and how I'm going to approach that. But again, when you hear the people speaking, you hear policymakers, everyone out there, they assume we're going to get it right. And this is how we are going to get it right. The whole discussion is focused on what is the right thing to do and the best thing to do, and how we are going to get to point X on the map in the best way. No one is ever debating what happens if you end up at point Y or point W on the map. And that is just perplexing to me. It's a world I have never inhabited, and it's a world I just don't fundamentally understand, because I'm not worried about what happens when we get to X. Everything will be fine there. I'm only ever worried about those other trails that doesn't lead to that point on the map. And no one ever discusses that or debates it.
Yeah, I mean, you get censored if you're in the US, right?
Yeah, but I think that's, what's going on is basically that the world is the planet, kind of our overall environment and stuff, our buffers, our store, the larder that's in the cave or whatever it is running out. And we are not used to thinking about that. We're just not used to thinking about that. Japan, in the time when it was collapsing, I think the other day, Richard and I was having a conversation, he was saying, how can such a bunch of educationally deficient people get to run the BOJ, the Bank of Japan, or whatever the words he used? It was actually kind of...
I wasn't quite that kind, okay?
You're having very interesting conversations off the air.
And the point about it is because they switched from a bank that was accepting they were in a demographically terrible situation. They had come along and they're facing sort of a deflationary world, and they're trying to keep things just chugging along, to buying in about 5-10 years ago, buying in almost wholesale of this idea that they somehow have to reboost all the growth and everything else, and kickstart everything, and kind of really embrace inflation as the thing that will get them out of trouble. And of course, they create their own monster as a result, and that's what they have. But Japan had gone through this 2-3 decades from end of '89 basically until basically about 5-10 years ago.
Yeah.
Of actually believing tomorrow is worse than today and the day after is going to be tougher even. So what do? So in that world, you're not after, here is my goal. If I get there, this is how it will work out okay. That's a world where you say, I may aim for that. I don't know where I'm going to be. This is Joe's comment about, kind of it works out because it turns out to be that way in that sense. So you actually end up preparing very differently about what it is. And culturally, starting from the time when the Toyota production system came about with all the Kanban and all those things, all the seeds to all the agile stuff, they were there to try and face a world which had no growth. They were asking, as a car company, how do you make profit by selling one car? That's the sort of situation that allows you to be in the current situation and actually see, what can I do? But we're still in the world of saying, how can I make as many cars as possible? Because, just think, how many times have you heard people either talk about how can you build capacity, how can you scale? That's not a world where you can make profit by selling one car. That's a world where you can only make profit if everything goes your way. And that's the language the current politicians all have and the current businesses all share.
Yeah.
So that's a huge mental disconnect.
I remember your book, Unsustainable Truths. the piece where you were discussing Japan, I found incredibly fascinating because it made me look at it in a completely different light. Maybe at some point we should talk about them because there's a lot economically going on in Japan at the moment. I know, Richard, you're doing a lot there, which I think is really an important part of the global economic story. But the other heat that we're concerned about, and if you're paying attention to the charts, is the heat that's actually in the ocean, because of course with an El Nino, they call it the big burp so this is a big release of heat, and that's what we're going to see. So the charts are not pretty, and obviously we're going to have mass die-off events in the oceans. We'll see sea creatures moving. I was listening to in I think it was in Greece. They've got an infestation of a poisonous fish that can't be eaten, and it's not one of the ones they even eat in Japan. It's basically an invasive species. But the average ocean temperature at the end of June was 21 degrees Celsius, which beats both 23 and 24, which were the last impacts where we saw El Nino. And so obviously tropical cyclone risk. So the hurricane season is a little bit less as far as its impact on the US. Doesn't mean it's zero. It just means there's 5 rather than 6 type hurricanes. But all this extreme heat in the ocean, I worry for the Philippines. We obviously saw Taiwan and Japan get a massive flood from a double event in the last sort of week or so. It didn't get that much attention in the mainstream news because the heat wave in Europe and the US is getting all the attention. But we've got thermal expansion because the ocean's getting warmer, and of course coral bleaching. We've already passed the tipping point, but it's not good it's not a good story for the oceans, and the extreme events that we're going to see are going to be so much more magnified. But I also think, and I'd be interested in Joe's perspective here, for the first time, we're really going to see the data centers straining the grids, and with the possible impacts, including grids falling over and potentially widespread loss of life because the humidity is so high, especially in the US. So we're already starting to see the grid strain. So as it gets hotter and the individuals sort of ramp up their energy needs, it's also when the data centers are saying, I need that energy, and it can't go down, because if it goes down, I fall over. And so I think we're going to start to see that having an impact on potential deaths. But did you have a look at any of that, Joe?
Not in detail. I've been thinking about it though, in terms of like what we face, and the problem is that we're built. The human race is built around the truth that makes The Boy Who Cried Wolf a good story, right? In the original story, a lot of people imagine that in a version they tell themselves is the boy cried wolf and there wasn't a wolf, right? In the original story, actually, the wolf showed up. He cried wolf. The wolf disappeared. They came. They didn't see a wolf. And the world we live in right now is very much like that. We're crying wolf. Things show up and then they go away. So I was in relation to this, just thinking about the problem, like how people remember and think about COVID, right? And it's like it's a thing gone past. We look at the bad things that happened during that time and said, we shouldn't have done this, shouldn't have done all the different things. And I asked the question, like if I told you today there was going to be something that came along that would kill 7 million people, that was preventable, would you do something about it? You probably would say something like that. You probably go, oh yeah, maybe I would. That was the actual death toll from COVID. 7.1 million people died.
No, wasn't it like between 25 and 30 million? Wasn't that the official numbers? You may have other related sort of deaths, but if we just kept it simple with just direct causality, right? And then you look at it and go like, someone can go, well, actually that's not that much in terms of the world population. It's actually just less than 0.01% of the world population affected by this disease that promised to be so much more, right? And they go, so we didn't have to worry that much about it. But we can forget that was after a lot of crying wolf happened. There was
There were all the different things that happened along the way where we said we had to look out for this outbreak, that outbreak, and then we had the Spanish flu. All these things happened along the way where we said that we had to look out for stuff. And then it came. And it came at a time when we said we're going to change, we're not going to be looking at things that way. And if you remember who was in charge in the US at the time and how we were looking at things, what we were very lucky with was actually the way, the timing of vaccines and how that came in. I mean, that was seriously such a big change. It made a huge difference. But when we remember this and when we look back at this, we will not remember it as something that happened the way it did. We will remember it as this thing that happened that we overreacted, and therefore we should not maybe do that the next time something comes along, right? And that's the thing that's going to happen with this as well. We've had grids go down in the U.S. We've had them go down. We've had that during the ice during the snowfall, right? I think they've had that in Texas when they had snow. And I think the grid went down. I think they were overwhelmed. It's either I hope it's not a fever dream I'm remembering, but
yeah, it went into areas that weren't used to that sort of cold.
Yeah, and
snapped.
It was a snap, and people did die. It was not one of those things that people haven't experienced before. So the death because of a grid going down has happened before as well, and yet it will not be remembered because it's an exceptional situation. That's not the thing that's going to happen again. That idea, that kind of excuse that's built around that. So, yeah, this thing right now, we're not saying that, we're not raising an alarm to say that there is no issue. There already is an issue. There is already not enough energy in the system. So much so that the prices of energy elsewhere, I mean, the price of energy has gone up in price simply because there is a competition for those electrons, right? And that's telling you that there is a competition, there is a scarcity already. So it's not even abstract, but it can get much worse. And then it's going to be something that could be political fodder, of course, when it comes to the next elections. If a large group of someone's are affected by a situation where a choice was made between a data center and life, I mean, that's crazy. But
yeah, no, and that's the reason
the choice is being made. I mean, implicitly,
exactly.
it's not being made, and it's going to be between keeping the data center alive and keeping the hospital running, and the thing is, the hospital needs the data center to keep it running, and so you have these things along is everything else that goes in there. And incidentally, Texas was 2021, I think, and it was like a couple of weeks of power outage. And that was kind of crazy because you normally associate Texas as being the warm place as opposed to the cold place. And I think if you're going to ask if 7 million people are going to die, would you do something about it? I think people's first question is going to be where.
Yeah.
And if you tell them it's going to be somewhere over there, then you're going to say, okay, fine, I don't care. Yeah. I think that's the situation.
But what I'm saying is there is this, the cry wolf effect is such that there was a heat warning, or there's a heat warning right now that's been issued in the US, right? So statistically, 1 out of every 2 Americans is actually being exposed to a dangerous heat event right now. That's the warning that's come out. 164 million people at risk, right? They will not feel the risk of that. They won't understand that is what they're facing in that particular time right now. Because you can have that warning go out, and you can then turn on your television and see them playing a game of football and forget. That's the correlation, right? And that, for me, that's what I was looking at. I was going like, this is kind of risky because this weekend, this is where all the action's happening in terms of football. Well, not all the action, but 1/3 of it. And that's the kind of risk that's going on. I felt the anxiety yesterday as I was watching the game and going like, these are people going out in situations, and it wasn't the critical time yet, but it was like, that this is dangerous for everybody who's on the field right now, and it's going to get more dangerous.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
as
yeah.
much as we made our off-colored remarks about Donald Trump wanting to go for it over this weekend with a impassioned speech outdoors, we'll see. I mean that's not inadvisable. It's inadvisable, but I mean he's also stared at the sun during an eclipse.
And he's an 80-plus-year-old dude now, right? So, and he's not particularly healthy. But we are moving into a time and a temperature and humidity that it's never been seen before. Like, records are breaking everywhere. It's never been seen, right? So, and there's more energy consumption than there's ever been, and there's more requirement on the grids than there's ever been, and they are still 100-year-old grids. So one of the other stories is Google's consumption came out this week. From 23 to 24, they were using 7 watts or terawatts. The next year, it was 12 terawatts. So basically a 39% increase. So the tech companies, with the green companies, had all these green credentials, and all their websites were covered in it. All that stuff's gone now. And there's an exponential increase in energy required to run their data centers, to provide us with AI so we can make stupid videos and photos. But there is good use of AI, like David said. The hospital needs it. There's good use of technology, but I actually think that rather than, because when you were saying earlier, Joe, like humanity's not capable of seeing it. We're capable. This group of people right here are capable of seeing it. An event is coming, whether it's this year or next year. And so when they're looking at the records for Asia next year, when the heat comes, we're going to be in hell. We're going to really be in hell. Like, it's significantly higher. They're talking 4 degrees higher than normal. It's never been above 3.
I think this part that's worth mentioning along. We talk about El Nino. These are like single event type things, and it's like the wolf coming along. And we had Joe, what's his name? Umsoft.
Yeah, Umsoft, yeah.
Umsoft, the other week, about talking about kind of the Earth system and stuff. And he wrote this piece that, kind of very detailed piece with Tom Harris about how things are linked and stuff. And I was thinking about that, and I came to, my understanding, my appreciation of it is that, if you look around at the universe, at the planets and all those things, they're in fairly stable orbits. Everything moves around in a very nice way, and that's because they've settled into that over time. And the Earth systems have done that as well. So, we get the seasons, we get the winds coming, we get all of those things. It's cool there, it's windy there, the monsoons come at that time, and all the rest of it. But this is a very dynamic thing. They're pushing against each other all the time. And it's because they push against each other, and the planet has more or less been the same in terms of the amount of heat that it has and the amount of water that it has and all the rest of it, that is able to settle into that sort of thing. Yeah. What this Super El Nino coming is actually saying, there is now a disruption. It's being pushed stronger one thing or weaker another bit. And as it does so, it's like you're on a train that's crowded. One of those city trains where it's really crowded and you're standing around. Everybody's kind of like finding their space where they can be, where they're not sort of touching each other in that way. And it's just pretty steadily. But now someone starts bumping along. Everything else starts bumping along as a result. And so what's happening, what the Super El Nino is saying, is not even just that this wolf is coming, but everything is going to be shuffled around. And even though you may be used to expecting one thing to come, it's not going to. Because everything will just be shuffled around. And the reason that's really important is because the oceans have warmed up a lot more. And the oceans have a lot more heat capacity to keep energy in it than the air and the rocks. So when it burps those heat out, it's going to push everything else along.
Yeah.
So if your ocean currents start moving around, other currents move, your monsoon rains change, everything's going to change, and it's not going to go back. It's just like if you're in this train. You get that guy who is in there suddenly bumping around and bumps hard enough, everybody's moved around. It's gone into a different thing. It's not going to go back. The guy finally falls over or stops or sits down, whatever. People don't go back to where they are.
I think we can call him a fat guy too. It helps.
Okay. It's a new trolley problem, actually. It's the new trolley problem.
And what Jan was saying was, of course, is that in the past, when we've had an El Nino, that it then goes back to an extent, right?
Yeah.
But what we've actually started to see is it's not
going back.
It'll cool a little bit, but the acceleration is on the way. So yeah, we're in trouble. So I wanted to we're coming up to the hour. So is there anything that you really wanted to talk about that's happened this week that sort of, I'm sort of thinking Trump's crypto wealth or anything before we close up?
Yeah. I think it's worth mentioning because there was quite a lot of focus on how much money the Trump family has taken out. And obviously it's worth reflecting on, but we are living in this world now, and I cannot emphasize this strongly enough. This is as far removed from any capitalist world that I grew up loving. This is just crony capitalism on a scale we have never seen before. And it's going to end very badly because, that's what crony capitalism ends up like. And when you start mixing sort of what's good for the country with what's good for me, and you're in that kind of position of power, and obviously you are a very corruptive person, and it requires enormous strength not to be that. And I'm sure all US presidents are more or less corrupt on that scale because they've all profited immensely from the position, but normally after the presidency rather than during. It's going to reflect on society as a whole. And we live in a world where people think it's totally okay with crony capitalism as a mechanism for running the economy. And it's going to end really, really badly.
Always does. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just if you missed the news, basically he's received more than 2.2 billion in income since returning to office. I saw a chart where it's all the former prime presidents, and they're just like 0 or 1. In his first was like three things, but this current one, it's like it's just off the charts. I'll see if I can find it, put in the weekend reads. All right. Tell me, what's keeping you distracted?
Wimbledon and World Cup.
Yeah. Right. So England's still in? I'm not paying attention.
England's just in. I was actually having a conversation with someone the other day. I was comparing keeping below 2 degrees warming as being like England making it to the semi-finals, and keeping to 1.5 is like it winning with the World Cup. So there you go.
I was explaining to my wife the other day that England's job is to raise hopes and then dash them terribly.
Yes,
they're very good at that. Better than anyone else, almost.
Yeah. I suppose Australia is just like, oh wow, they made it.
Yeah.
Well, I think talking of Australia, I mean, I was watching Maya joint against Serena Williams, and in Wimbledon, and she is amazing.
Is she an Australian tennis player?
Yeah.
Okay. So
and
that's how much attention I'm paying.
Yeah, I don't know if it's true. Apparently, she'd lost the last 11 games.
Okay.
Yeah, she had a very bad run apparently coming into Wimbledon. Yeah.
Very bad streak. She lost 11 games before she faced Serena Williams on centre court.
And
But
Australia does have some tennis heritage where soccer's a little bit different, right? If you go way back, Australia's got some tennis heritage. In fact, that's a Netflix documentary I've been meaning to watch. Is Martina and two of the original famous lady tennis players. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to watch it.
Yeah, Everett.
No.
What's her name?
Everett. Yeah, Everett and Martina Navratilova. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that looks like a really good yarn. I've been. Richard?
Oh, for me, it's definitely the Tour de France starts tomorrow in Barcelona.
Okay. Wow. Just as they're starting a heat wave.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's not known for being a particularly cool city in July in Barcelona. So
yeah,
and they're hitting the Pyrenees already in the first week. So compared to a lot of historical tours where they're very backloaded in the last week in the Alps, actually, you're going to experience just as much heat and climbing in the first week as you probably ever done in the history of the tour. So
wow.
I would readily say that anyone who comes to Paris, even if you're 5-6 hours after the presumptive winner, which will be Pogacar without an accident, you are a physical phenomenon. To go through 3,500 kilometers in those conditions over 3 weeks, you are a physical phenomenon.
All right, I didn't even know it had started. There's a lot more talk around sporting events, like we were talking about Bangkok and laying its cables for electricity when it's going to drown. To me, the other thing is, they're talking about the 2030 World Cup. I think is in Morocco. Does that sound right?
Yeah, Morocco, Spain, and Portugal. It's the first time it's been shared across 2 continents.
In June, July, August.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like in 2030, like that's just stupid, right?
Yeah, but think of it. 2034 will play in Saudi Arabia. That's going to be nice.
Yeah, but when they played in Qatar, they moved it to the winter time. But they've still got that one scheduled for the summertime.
That will change. I'm fairly sure because
it has to, right?
Yeah, and I will readily say, as a massive football fan, someone who grew up loving the game, I have no interest in this tournament. I didn't have any interest in the last tournament either. Football needs to do a serious rethink. If you are going to play a summer tournament of this magnitude, it has to happen in the Southern Hemisphere. And there aren't that many countries that has the ability to host an event like this, because this is ridiculous.
I mean, that's because you're only saying that because Italy's not in it.
No, it's just the quality
Shots
of
fired.
football. The quality of football on display is a complete joke. Even the team that's going to end up winning the World Cup, I don't think would stay in the Premier League.
That's
how much lower the
because
quality
Italy's not in it.
No.
Well,
No.
I'm just worried about the coming weeks with the heat waves going through. Yeah. We're going to see deaths, whether it's players or people who are there to support. We're going to see deaths because, we were talking about Americans got such a different interest. So all these young fans hanging around Madison Square Garden. I don't care about the heat. I just want to be part of Taylor's story. So we might see some Taylor fans dying.
Oh my God!
Yeah, I mean,
did you see that one? When the concert was in Brazil or whatever?
Yeah. It was in Brazil. She lost one fan. Yeah, a couple of years ago. Yeah. All right, Joe. What about you? What's distracting you?
Well, part of it is trying to build that AI empire that I've been contemplating, but it's more a sense of picking up everything that I don't know and try to figure out how to make it work together. And I've actually, because of all this time right now, taken my eye off trading, which I have to bring it back to again very shortly. And I've been trying to hack LinkedIn, basically trying to get a bit more, exposure there. So I've got a few things going out very soon. There's a podcast which I did with a friend. I don't know if you know Jory, who does the Magic Sauce. Yep. Okay. We had a good interview. It was quite. I actually enjoy interviews because it makes me think about things I don't normally think about, and I've seen it. It's coming out, so that's going to be the latest content that I'll be sharing. I held it back because I had this show to promote, but now that we're done with that, I'll move on to that.
I've asked Yuri to come on the show, but he's never said yes. So see if you can convince him for me.
Okay, I'll give him a poke and see how.
Yeah. All right. So I've had the house basically to myself for 3 weeks, which has been super weird. Lex has obviously been at camp and he comes home for a few days and he goes back. But Steve and Jax have been doing a bit of a road trip around Australia. One, so Jax can experience some cold weather. He hates it. And two, because he's starting national service on the 23rd of July. So, and he's just finished his IB and, he's having that sort of time with grandparents and family before he basically doesn't have any freedom for 2 years. So, but if it's all right with you guys, I would like to share that I launched one of my AI tools. It's not an empire. Nobody's paying me anything to do it, but I launched the Overshoot Challenge. And the ideas here are, what I like to do with AI is people ask me questions all the time. And so I like to answer those questions. So the Overshoot Challenge is, what can I do? And it's big stuff, it's small stuff, but it's just get going. I have actually added it a way where you can sign up as a member now. I didn't want to do that originally because I didn't want it to be a data gathering platform, because everybody wants your data these days and I find it really obnoxious. But I'm doing it so that you can save your information and it's better, and then potentially we can grow the 1 billion people movement, which, basically that's what we need. So the Overshoot Challenge, sign up. I only got 70 something people on the first day. So I'm a long way off 1 billion. So it's designed to be easy to start with the conversation all the way through to complicated, where you can understand a little bit more detail about why making a change matters in that particular area. And if you want to do something really good for yourself, go and rewatch Ted Lasso. Because the new one is about to come out. So Lex and I had a couple of short periods of time in the last week, so we just basically got through Ted, and it's just a reminder that kindness really can change the world. So if it's been a while,
there we are.
Yep.
Yeah,
I haven't seen the new, but
it's not out yet.
The whole family loved the old one.
Yeah. So it's a female.
It's
launching a female team.
Yeah, it's a girls' team, right?
Yeah.
I just love that people are so committed to shows they have to do the homework before the next bit comes out.
Yeah, no, I didn't do it for that. I just wanted, I just needed some Ted vibes.
Ted vibes.
Yeah, because he's just kind and sweet, and his wife leaves him because she can't stand his optimism. It's like. It's the ironic sort of twist for me, the whole piece. It's like, to be around that all the time, he's actually quite annoying. I know my optimism annoys my husband. Anyway, there we go. Look, there was loads of other stuff that we were going to cover that we didn't cover. I'll put them in the weekend reads. We've got 2 more shows and then we're going to have a break.
Yeah.
Next week at this point, it's just us, unless someone reaches out, maybe talk to Yari.
I'm waiting for a reply from someone, but I haven't heard back. So yeah.
Well, if he's available next Friday, and then the final show, we're going to have a special guest who's an expert on China, which I think will be a really, really cool conversation to be having. But otherwise, stay safe in the heat. Take it seriously. Don't be a dickhead. Too many dickheads out there. And we'll see you next Friday.
See you. Have a good weekend.
Have a good weekend. Stay safe. Stay cool.
Go England.